And congratulations to the Philadelphia Eagles and all their fans for winning their first Super Bowl. Well, at the time I preached this lesson, it was the morning of Super Bowl 52 and the game hadn't been played yet. So we had the Philadelphia Eagles fans up against the dynasty of the New England Patriots. And the Eagles pulled it out. Well, the lesson comes out of 1 Timothy chapter 4, where Paul is nearing the end of his ministry, and he tells Timothy, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Those are the words of a champion, not a quitter. And like a football team that starts with its season and goes through ups and downs, they win some games, they lose some games, players get hurt. Paul had a lot of ups and downs too. Shipwrecks, he was imprisoned, he was beaten. He had, even within the household of Christianity, had people coming out against him. He had his fellow Jews that were against him. But in the end, he persevered, like we all have to do. And that's what we're going to look at today, is being a champion. As Bill Cosby once said, if you're not careful, you might just learn something. So let's get started.
In case you haven't heard, there is a ball game today. And tonight we'll know who the NFL champion is going to be. I mean, we're down to the Eagles.
Oh, Eagles, right? Hometown favorites.
Yeah, I heard there's some hometown out of Tallahassee and somewhere else that are.
I think it's Wakulla and Waukegan.
Okay.
There's four.
There you go. Hey, that's local boys right there.
But they've run their respective divisions, and tonight, the last man standing will be get bragging rights to be the NFL champion. Now, here's the thing, remember, is that these teams didn't just get up this morning and decide, hey, let's go play a football game to be the champions. They've had to work at it. To win anything, you got to work at it. And they have put in the time, and they have put in the effort, and you know, despite the controversy the last couple of years with the NFL, this is still going to be a pretty big deal. And there's still some good Bible lessons, believe it or not, we can get from this. Now, these two quarterbacks have put in quite a bit of time, and if I'm not mistaken, Nick Foles of the Eagles was not the starter at the beginning of the year. He was the backup and has been put into the starting role because the starter's been out with injuries. Tom Brady, well, love him or hate him, this is his, 30th or 40th Super Bowl he's going in or something like that. But you notice champions are not born, they're made. It takes work to be a champion. You have to go through your ups and your downs. Even if a team goes completely undefeated, 16-0 for the NFL and then wins the Super Bowl, a baseball team, they're still going to have miscues. They're going to barely win some games. They are going to have drop passes. They're going to have defensive plays that are blown. But they managed to overcome that. And when we look in the scriptures, we see some examples of that. For instance, David and his mighty men. Now, David had his problems, his ups and his downs. And in 2 Samuel 23, these mighty men, some of the commentators have looked at them as being kind of like a Delta Force or Ranger or SEAL team that he's working with. These aren't just your common average soldiers that he's got guarding him. But they were considered champions. And then there's even some women like Deborah in Judges chapter 5 with she and Barak, who went up against Jabin and gathered the people and inspired them to go up against and to free Israel. And you look at Judges, there's that whole cycle there of them being on top and then falling into sin, then a judge comes along and lifts them up, and then it all just kind of keeps going. It's a pretty good study we might have to do sometime. And then what about Peter? Great guy, Peter. Who does people say I am? Well, some say you're the Son of God, or John the Baptist, some say Elijah, but who do you say I am? Peter says, well, you're the Christ, the Son of God. Blessed are you, Peter. And then a little bit later on, Jesus is telling him how he's got to go and be turned over to sinners and be put to death. Peter says, Lord, not so. And what does Jesus say? Get behind me, Satan. But yet Peter, and then let's not forget, Peter denied Jesus 3 times after saying, I'm going to die for you. But then who preached the first gospel sermon? Who converted thousands in the early days of the church? It was Peter, another champion. And then let's not forget Philip. You look in the first couple of chapters of John, Philip is one of the first people to bring people to Jesus. And then we have Philip later on, a different Philip in chapter 6 of Acts, who is a champion. And then let's not forget either Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. How would you like to be known just by your sibling? He's always Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. But if you look at it, it was actually him that brought people to Christ before Peter did. And then arguably the all-time champion of the Christian faith, in the early days at least, would be Paul. And this is the passage I want us to look at as he's nearing the end of his life in 2 Timothy chapter 4. When he said, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. Now notice, I have fought the good fight. He stayed in it. See, remember, champions are not made by accident. It takes work. Paul had to work. Paul, I think that's really a lot of the reason why Jesus picked Paul. His tenacity. He knew that Paul wouldn't back down. He knew Paul would work at it just like any other champion. You know, I've tried this osmosis, put the book under the pillow and let all the information go in. It doesn't work. Tried that when I was in school. You've got to study the playbook. And as Christians, we've got to study our playbook. We've got to know what it is. And we've got to work at it if we want to become champions. They are made by purpose and deliberate action. These guys, these teams that are playing today, and that game later on tonight, the players in Super Bowl 52 weren't born starting quarterbacks or linebackers or anything else. They decided early on, I want to play football. They decided as they went on, I want to go to the next level, I want to go to college, I want to play professionally. And they put the work into it. Now, do we want a congregation that's going to grow and be strong? We've got to put the work into it. It doesn't happen just by accident, by osmosis. If we want to really be champions. In fact, go back to our passage in 2 Timothy. I want you to notice Paul 3 times says, I have fought, I have finished, I have kept. And we've got to do the same thing if we want to have a church that's going to grow. If you as an individual want to succeed as a Christian, you're going to have to fight, you're going to have to finish, you're going to have to keep the faith. And that's what I want us to look at, to be champions. What do we need to do? Notice that first of all, we're going to take these 3 I haves of Paul and look at them today. First thing he's going to tell you is, I have fought the good fight. I have fought. If you're following along on the outline, notice Paul was not a quitter. That's the difference really between a winner and a loser. One doesn't quit. One keeps going. You notice too that when a team, football, basketball, baseball, whatever, they get a new coach. And they introduce the new coach, and he steps up to the podium to make his opening remarks as a new head coach. Have you ever heard one say, yeah, we're going to go completely defeated this season. We plan to lose every game. They generally start off with saying, or the owner or the athletic director, if it's a college team, will say something like, we're introducing our new head coach today because he's committed to excellence. We know he can take us to the next level. We know he can bring a championship to Jacksonville or Tallahassee or Tuscaloosa or wherever. And then the coach is going to step up and say, that's why I'm here. I'm here to win. I'm here to bring a championship. That's what they want to do. And Paul, you notice, was the kind who could do that. But he could be a little bit abrasive about it. Remember, he told the Galatians, I withstood Peter to the face when he was to blame. He told in Acts 13, told the Jewish leaders there that you have considered or counted yourselves unworthy of eternal life. From now on, I'm going over here to the Gentiles. I'm done with you people. You don't want the message? That's fine. I'm going across the street here. I'm going to the Gentiles. And I bet they all went running for their safe space, right? To curl up in a fetal position. No, they didn't. They came back at Paul. What about Jesus when he said, called them hypocrites, called the Pharisees hypocrites, or John the Baptist called them brood of vipers? Whoa. They would have been called down to the principal's office if they were on any campus today. But they were abrasive. Why? Because they had a message they had to get out. They had a job to accomplish. And they knew what it was with no doubts at all. Look at 2 Corinthians. Here's where Paul is laying out his credentials to some critics. And I picture him, you see this in movies sometimes, taking a deep breath and going through this whole list really fast. I tried it once when I was going over this lesson. I couldn't do it without stumbling. But it was something like this. Are they Hebrews? Well, so am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more. In labors more abundant. In stripes above measure. In prisons more frequently. In deaths more often. From the Jews 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been in the deep. In journeys and perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of Gentiles, in perils of the city, in perils of the wilderness, in perils of the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil and sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and in nakedness. Besides the other things, what comes upon me daily? My deep concern for all the churches. Now stop right there for a second. Notice he's not having a pity party in all this. His concern is with the other churches. Who is weak, and am I not weak? Who is made to stumble, and I do not burn with indignation? Well, what do we want to see here? We want to see here that this is all synonymous with danger with him. Paul didn't have any place to go where he could be safe. Preaching was pretty dangerous for him. He got left for dead once. He ended up being sent to Rome and eventually beheaded there. And notice the references to dangerous occurrences that he faced. But do you think he backed down? No, he stood up. He continued on with it. He continued and stayed in the fight. He wasn't going to stop because he had some opposition. See, Paul was a champion. He wasn't going to back out of it. And you notice too, God did not shield him from danger. To me, this situation, what Paul's describing here, is really the death knell to the prosperity gospel. Well, if you're faithful to God, you're going to be healthy and wealthy. Really? What we just read of Paul, he didn't sound too healthy, too wealthy to me. Well, he might have been healthy, I don't know. Probably not after getting 39 lashes. And then what about Jesus? You look at what they went through. And so for some preacher to get up and say, well, you must not have God's favor. You're sick all the time. You must not have God's favor. You're not living in a mansion. Go back and look at what happened with Paul. God did not shield him from any of these problems. He still had to go through with them, as did Jesus. Jesus said the servant is not above his master. Look at how they treated him. It's going to be the same with us. Now, it's not meaning we're always going to be butting heads and having problems. Sure, we'll have times that things are pretty well. But we cannot expect to always be healthy, always be wealthy, always have everything going smooth. Someone once pointed out to me that even if a life were a bed of roses, roses still have thorns, don't they? You got a nice yard, guess what? Somebody still got to cut that grass. You got a nice house, guess what? Somebody still has to clean it. It's still gonna be work. Same thing with Christianity. Brett Favre, who's now a Hall of Fame quarterback. Some of you may, he came out of a small town. I don't know if any of you know this. Small town about the size of Monticello. Got one scholarship offer to Southern Mississippi. That was it. After playing defensive back, punter, kicker, and quarterback. And he maybe threw about 5 or 6 times a game when he was in high school. That was about it. Got through college. Ended up with the Green Bay Packers. His brother-in-law died while he was on the team. I think it was an accident. And then on a Sunday in 2013, he got word that his dad had died of a heart attack. He had to play a Monday night game against the Raiders, and he put up what is arguably his best game. I think the final score was something like 41-7. And then he also nearly died in a car accident in college, had about 30 inches of his intestine taken out. But yet he kept bouncing back, played football till he was 40. You think someone like that is not a winner? A champion? Look at what he had to go through. How many of us could step out and play a game in front of it? That was actually an internationally televised Monday night game. It wasn't just national. How many of us could do something like that when we've just lost someone close to us? Or bounce back from that kind of an accident where we've almost died and yet we've had parts of our innards taken out. He came back. He was like Paul. He was a champion. Paul, also lived a disciplined life like any athlete, disciplined. He was one, remember, came from the school of the Pharisees. He was one that knew the scriptures, had been disciplined and taught. Which again, I think goes back to why Jesus picked him. He knew the old law, plus he was kind of stubborn, hard-headed, however you want to look at it. Which would be why Jesus would like someone like that. And then Paul also described this as normal for the Christian life, including things like we commend ourselves as ministers of God in much patience. In tribulation, if you're going through tribulation, you're going to need patience. In needs and distresses and stripes and imprisonments and tumults, labors and sleeplessness and fastings. Does that sound like someone who had a real easy time? Goes back to, again, to that prosperity gospel. You're going to be healthy. Well, it's going to be smooth sailing, really. So why then did Paul say things like, I have fought the good fight? Why did he say things like, put on the full armor of God? Why did he say things like, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and that sort of thing? I don't know about you, but if I'm going out on a picnic or I've got a nice leisure day planned, I don't put on body armor. If I'm in Afghanistan or Iraq, or I'm part of a police SWAT team and we're about to go and kick somebody's door, and then I'm going to put on the body armor. That's combat. That's battle. And the Christian life sometimes is going to be that. And Paul also had spiritual opposition. He had people who were trying to say, no, we have to keep the law of Moses. He had some who said, really, Paul, he's had all these things, been in prison, done this, he can't really be an apostle. And then you had some of these others over here that said, if you're going to be a Christian, you've got to have special secret knowledge revealed to you. And then they would all go after Paul, go after Peter, and that kind of thing. So he's got spiritual opposition that he's facing. But he says, I have fought the good fight. He's stayed in it. And then he says he finished the race. Some of us are probably going to be doing, in fact, most of us are probably doing good just to get there. I might have told you I had my 9th grade science teacher was on the U.S. Olympics cross-country ski team in '76. I asked him if he had got one of the medals, gold, silver, bronze, and he just said, I was doing good just to finish. And there were a lot that didn't finish. I think he finished something like 115 or 20th out of 170. So he didn't even finish in the top half. But he made it. He finished his race. See, we can't give up. That's one of the things about being Christians and being strong is we cannot give up. Got to stick to it. And I think a lot of times that's why so many Christians end up falling away. This is why it's so important when someone is baptized into Christ that we don't just send them on their way, give them a hug and say, well, we'll see you next week, or hopefully see you Wednesday night, right? Okay. That's why we need to follow it. Make some phone calls, maybe an email or Facebook or however it is you communicate, and stay in touch with them. Because remember, they're going to leave here. They're going to go home to their family. Hey, I was baptized today. Oh, really? Hey, what time's the game start again? They're going to go into work to the same environment they had when they left Friday or whatever the last time they were there. Hey, I've become a Christian. Oh, really? Okay, hey, we got a deadline to meet here. And then we wonder why people don't always stick to it. That's why we've got to be cheering them, encouraging them, helping to push them forward so that they won't quit. And look at what Paul went through for the gospel. Remember what Jesus went through so that they could get God's teachings and get them handed down so that it would pass on down to where we are today. He fought the good fight. He finished that race. He continued on, Quitting is not something that we can ever hope to do if we want to grow a church, if we want to be successful in the Christian, if we want to be successful in anything. You cannot be someone who is going to quit. That is not the way of a champion. You don't see teams that just halfway through the season just, we'll just stay home. Sometimes you can tell they're giving up. And that's usually when they don't go anywhere. There was one year, about in the early 90s, the Chargers started, I think it was like 0-4. They ended up winning the rest of their games. They ended up in the Super Bowl. It can happen. Just because you have a bad start doesn't mean you have to finish bad. And you notice Paul was just as human as you or I. You remember what James said about Elijah? He was a man what? Just like us. Paul was just as human as us. When Paul was before Agrippa or Festus, I sometimes wonder if he wasn't feeling the fear, the adrenaline going, the heart racing. Because just like us, how many of us have maybe been in that situation where with the boss or something and we've got a touchy subject we're talking about? We feel fear. Anyone that way feel frustration? Yeah, I feel frustration. I'm a parent. We get frustrated with our kids, don't we? We get angry with people. We get upset. We want to quit. Elijah wanted to quit. I'm the only one left, Lord. Elijah, I've got 700 others who haven't bowed the knee to Baal. You just don't know about it. Paul was human. He felt frustration. He felt anger. Well, he withstood Peter to the face. I don't think that was exactly a happy or pleasant moment for him. So they, whatever we're feeling, they felt. Whatever kinds of issues we had to deal with, they had to deal with too. Remember, there's nobody, no feeling or emotion that is new. There is nothing new under the sun. But we can still stick to it, still keep the church growing, because not quitting is more than just determination. It is the essence of our faith. That's what it's all about. And remember, our faith is not just some kind of a pie in the sky. We've got evidence. That's what the writer of Hebrews said when he said, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That's that word for substance there is the same word we get our English word hypothesis from. And a hypothesis has evidence. Paul's faith in God was greater than his sufferings. He was determined to see it through. Why? He's got evidence for a faith. We all do. Paul lived a directed life. It wasn't one where he just did whatever he wanted to do. But he didn't do like Frank Sinatra did, and I did it my way. Don't worry, I'm not going to try and sing the whole song to you. But that became Sinatra's song. He really didn't like the song, but it became his signature song. But that's not what Paul's saying here. Paul did what it was that God wanted him to do. It was a directed life. He never went off on his own. He was inspired to do things, to write things he said. I read an account while I was preparing for this of a teacher at a college took his son on a 1,000-mile trek starting in Northern California up through British Columbia. 1,000-mile hike. They camped out under the stars. And his dad did some research about how people who went on extreme hikes like that and how the ones that finished. And what he found out was, yeah, they had to prepare for it, obviously, because they're also going up above the 10,000 foot level. They're camping out. It takes some mental preparation. It takes some physical preparation, logistic preparation. But what he found was about 10% of them determined not to quit, to stick it through. And it was the mental preparation that meant just as much as the physical preparation, if not more. And that's what it came down to for Paul. It's what it might come down to for us. I'm just sticking this out. I'm going to make sure that I finish this. I am going to fight the good fight. I'm going to finish the race because I have kept the faith. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to stay in it. And that's exactly what Paul did. Stayed in the faith, stayed in the race, kept his faith, so that at the end he could say, there is henceforth laid up for me a crown of righteousness. He was a keeper. By keeper, I don't mean, when you meet someone that you, oh yeah, she's a keeper. He's a keeper in the sense he kept his faith. Held on to it. kept pushing ahead. In keeping his faith, he had to get through a lot of trials, a lot of battles. None of it was going to come easy. But he understood, compared to Jesus. Have you ever stopped to think about what Jesus went through? Because remember, he said, again, we said this earlier, the servant is not above the master. So if they hated Jesus, do you think the world's going to love us? No, they really aren't. But Paul also could be very patient and wait for what was coming. Tough to do sometimes. And let's remember, this is a statement of defiance and triumph. Everybody remember this picture? Tiananmen Square, about 1990, downtown Beijing. I've wondered whatever happened to this person. Stood there staring down these tanks. Defiance. Triumph. I'm assuming that's male. I honestly don't know. But I've wondered, how many of you think he's not feeling a little bit of fear? Standing there staring down these tanks. This was when they decided over there to try and throw off the communist government. It was kind of a rebellion. I don't know what happened to this guy, but he is definitely showing us, making a statement here, defiance. And that's what Paul was doing here in 2 Timothy 4. It's a statement of defiance. I have fought the good fight. I'm not defeated. I have kept the faith. And remember, we're walking by faith, not by sight. We have evidence. The writer, Paul in Romans, told us that the creation tells us there is a creator. This building here tells me somewhere there's an architect that designed it. There is a contractor that was hired to do it. There was a crew of electricians and plumbers and carpenters and bricklayers and whatever else that went into it to build it. Who was it? I don't know. Some of you may know. And if I wanted to take the time, I could figure it out and find out who did it. The creation, the universe, and the order in it tells us there is a creator. Who is that creator? Well, that's where we use our minds to figure out who it is. And how we study to find out who it is. And then Paul is also sounding not only defiance, but victory. There is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with claiming the victory. Nothing wrong with having praise for God. That's great. And even better than any Super Bowl is to be able to rejoice at the victory we can have. The victory we are going to have one day. And Paul tells us that without faith it is impossible to do it. He knew that. Like the writer of Hebrews said, we can't do it, we can't please God without faith. Now, we told you all we got a trip coming up. And one time I was explaining this whole idea about faith, how anything in the future is based on faith. And it was a similar situation. We had a trip planned, had the plane tickets bought, we had a rental car reserved, we had a hotel reserved, we had all this other thing. Atheist popped up and said, oh, that's not faith, that's a reasonable expectation. I don't have faith in anything. And I thought about it and I said, okay, tomato, tomato. You call it reasonable expectation, I call it faith. Until we actually make that trip and we've returned, it's not fact. I mean, we'll speak about it as we will be flying out on so-and-so date at such and such a time. We will be on a particular airline. We'll be having lunch here and doing this and doing that. I state it as a fact, but really it's a statement of faith. All kinds of things could happen between now and then. The airline could go bankrupt. Doubt that'll happen. One of us could get really sick. We could be in an accident on the way down or blow out a tire and miss the plane. Any number of things could happen. Until I actually make that, it's not faith. Until we actually get to heaven, it's all based on faith. Then our faith becomes sight. It's not faith if it's sight. It's one or the other. But when it comes to our winning, we can be just as victorious. Our greatest goal should be taking as many people to heaven with us to please God. That's better than any Super Bowl. That's better than any championship you can get here. And Paul had that championship summed up when he said he had won the crown of righteousness. Henceforth there's laid up for me a crown of righteousness, and not for me only, but for all who God will award to in that day. All. It's for everybody. Not just me, not just you, not just Paul, but we will all get it one day. And I don't know about you, but I really am looking forward to being able to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. I hope everybody is. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been master over small things. I'll make you master over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Amen. And at that point, it will become sight. It will be the victory. It'll all be over. We'll be like Paul. We'll receive that crown. It'll be better than any Vince Lombardi trophy or any other trophy that we might win here on this earth. But you got to be on the team in order to get there. You got to have your name on the roster. So is your name on the roster? Are you ready to be a champion? Are you contending for the faith? Are you in the fight? Or are you just kind of struggling and staggering trying to get by? See, Paul was not one to take the easy way out, because really there is no easy way out. We're going to have our ups, we're going to have our downs, just like a team going through its season. They're going to have games where they just blow out their opponents. They're going to have games they barely win. And yeah, they're going to have some games they lose. And that's just the way life really is. So this morning, if your name's not on the roster, why not put it on the roster? Be on the winning team so that you can too one day have that victory. Be a champion for Christ. Live your life for Jesus. Be baptized. If you have not been baptized into Christ to have your sins forgiven, then do it. Or if you just need prayers to get you back in the game, we can do that too. And if we can help you, let us know while we stand and while we sing.